So now we are in the last panel, which is leading with data, how HR can lead the way into the future with data. And we have an amazing panel joining us today, and I'm going to be welcoming them in a second. But before getting there, I want to once again tell you something that I've been saying throughout the entire day. There have been a lot of insights shared throughout this day, throughout this event, and I know it can get confusing at times, and it can get even overwhelming at times. So at the end of the day, what I am hoping is, number one, to awake your curiosity so that you continue to learn more about the areas that you're interested in learning more. Number two, that you pick out of all the things that we have talked about for the past 8 hours, that you pick out whatever area makes sense for you and you develop it, scale it up, and try to apply it to your practice in HR, to your own department, your own function, and whatnot. And for those areas that may not be necessarily that applicable to you, or that maybe are still too far ahead or far behind you, well, you just leave it on the side for now and come back to them if needed, whenever you can come back to them. Anyway, all I'm saying can be summarized in: don't be overwhelmed, don't be overburdened by all that we've shared today. These are just insights, and you take whatever makes sense for you. Alrighty, let me welcome our fantastic panel: Michal, Trent, Tracy, Dawn, and Chris, joining us for this amazing conversation on, as part of the event, Leading with Data, and this last panel, Leading with Data, how HR can lead the way into the future. So the way we normally do this, welcome everybody. Dawn, Tracy, Chris, Michal, Trent, thank you so much for being here. I am so happy to see you all. The way I normally kick off all of these conversations, it's sort of pretty much the same way, which is I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself, but I'm going to ask you to also respond to one question. So that's going to be the kickoff of our panel. So besides introducing yourself, I'm going to ask you, how can HR be better at connecting data with strategy, with business outcomes, in order to become the leader that we are hoping HR not only continues to become, but for those HR functions that are still in that journey, that they can actually step up to that role of leadership? How can we connect data, HR strategy, and business outcomes? So not an easy one to kick off this conversation. So please introduce yourself and share some insights about this one question if you can. So anybody who wants to jump in first, please go ahead. Trent, you're unmuted, man. I'm gonna begin with
I was just thinking, I grew up in the South, so it's always like, ladies first, and I'm the only dude on here, so I was like, I'm just going to go last.
Well, you were the one that was unmuted.
All right, well, I'll definitely kick us off. All right, so Trent Cotton, I am currently the Vice President of Talent Acquisition, Retention, and Insights, or Analytics for Bureau Veritas. We are one of the leading testing, inspection, and certification firms globally, based in Paris, and I lead all of the fun little insights, acquisition, and retention, everything to do with talent for all of North America. So to answer your question, I kind of want to use one of my favorite quotes from William Denning. It says, "In God we trust, everyone else must bring data," and that's kind of one of my core mantras. And I think that whenever you position yourself that way, it kind of reframes the question. So it's, what is the data telling us? What's the story that the data tells us? Very similar to the kind of what the previous panel was saying. So I think the best way to transform is kind of start with yourself and not just always do what most HR people do, which is trust their gut. It's validate your gut with data.
Love that. Validate your gut.
Validate your
gut. Thank you, Trent. Welcome. Thank you. Chris, I think you want to go next.
I do. How did you know? Hi, everyone. I'm Chris Hevrilla. I lead, essentially I'm the lead human capital industry tech analyst for Deloitte, study the world of workforce, workplace, and the role technology and data plays in it. And do that for essentially three audiences: people who buy technology and try to use this technology and data, the vendors who provide it, and Deloitte themselves. And so I do have some really strong opinions about this that we've written about in our research. And I really think it comes down to owning the outcomes, right? So you talked about business outcomes and how HR strategy connects to that and data strategy connects to that. But, one of the things that I think is incredibly important is for people in HR to really decide that they're going to, own work and workforce issues, right? Because who else owns that, right? Who else owns those things? But I think they also have to do it with kind of an expanded focus, which is not just full-time employees, right? But all workers, all parts of the workforce. By the way, machines are part of the workforce now too, right? And so, we have to kind of think about that. What data is being captured? What can be leveraged? What can we learn from it? And how do we tell a story to Trent's point, right? How do we kind of utilize data to do that? But we also have to realize we have to extend our influence, and extending our influence across all stakeholders. And we think of all the stakeholders, that really is workers, customers, partners, suppliers, the business leaders, right? So if you extend that influence, you're automatically going to start thinking about business outcomes and thinking about all the things that impact those areas. And I think third is just the love of the story, so which kind of goes to the gut, right? And learn how to validate that with the data too. But everybody loves a story, but it's not enough to come from the gut. Validating it with data is the best way to kind of deliver a punchline, and that's what we need to do to extend our influence around this expanded focus.
Wonderful, Chris. Thank you so much for sharing the insights, and welcome to the panel. Who wants to go next? Michal, I think you were unmuting yourself before.
You're sharp, Enrique. Hi, everyone. Hello from Jerusalem. And thank you, Enrique, for having this day and this panel, and feel honored to be included. So my name is Michal. I'm an organizational psychologist and the CEO of Starlinks, which focuses on building social capital with organizational network analysis. And really that's my passion, and what I do is bring together network analytics with network thinking, network leadership, and future models of work. So that's kind of in a sentence. And as for your question, I have three kind of thoughts around connecting the data, the HR, and the strategy. So one is, and I think that HR can do better at looking at data and analytics as a cultural intervention. So rather than look at it, or what data do I have, what analytics, also to think about the way we measure and the way we then use the data as a strong cultural signal for people. And culture eats strategy for breakfast, we say. So I think this is the main point to the strategy, is really understanding not just how the data serves the strategy, but also how the intervention with the collection of the data and the use of the data is already a part of this culture leading to the strategic execution. The second is thinking like a product, asking questions, thinking about the problem, thinking about the end user. So getting product thinking. And the third would be thinking about the day after the data. So especially with network analytics, a lot of people, organizations really like the maps, and let me see the map, and like, it's really fascinating. But what about the day after? I always say, like, after you get the map, what do you want? Like, what is the next step after? So I think this would be my third point. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michal, for sharing those insights. And if data and analytics are cultural interventions, and culture it's a strategy for breakfast, I'm guessing that data and analytics are maybe the orange juice and the coffee in that breakfast, hopefully. Thank you so much, Michal. Don, do you want to go next?
Sure. So, hi everyone. I'm Dawn Klinghoffer, and I lead the people analytics team at Microsoft. You ask a very interesting question, Enrique. I was actually talking to someone about this yesterday. They asked me this very question. They said, "How do you even get started?" Okay, and my answer is a little bit. I'm going to build on what some of you have already said, but I said getting curious, really understanding the problem that you're trying to solve, creating hypotheses and testable predictions. That is the easiest way to get started, using data, connecting it to HR and the strategy. And in particular, if you start with the business problem that you're trying to solve, and then you go down into the layer of, okay, and how can HR support that business problem that you're trying to solve, and come up with different hypotheses that you can test. That is just a very practical way that I've been able to explain to people on how to get started. The other thing that I would add in, though, is HR really also needs to focus on building capability. And so while historically using data has not been a core competency of the HR profession, I think in the last 5+ years, it has become increasingly more important. And I'm seeing that schools, that HR practitioners are coming out of MBA school with analytics capability. And it's amazing to see that. It's amazing to see that professors are really taking this seriously.
Yeah. Don, thank you so much, and welcome to the panel. By the way, a little bit in the analytics jargon, if we did analytics on all of the panels that we've had today, and we found the frequency of some of the expressions we've used, curiosity and connecting with business outcomes and business problems will be at the highest frequency of all of the conversations we've had today.
And I swear I didn't watch any of the others.
No, I know. It's just I think it's just the beauty of the way we are sort of addressing and visualizing the possibilities here. So thank you, Don, and welcome. Last but not least, Tracy. Hi.
Hi, Enrique. Hi, everyone. I'm happy to be here. My name is Tracy Spanenberg. I'm the Chief People Officer of a company called the Granite Group, and we're a wholesaler based in the Northeast. We're a plumbing wholesaler. I'm actually in Las Vegas at a plumbing wholesaler executive conference right now, believe it or not. That's a thing. And I've been a practitioner for about 25 years. So I've lived the journey of, to Don's point, of that not being data, not being a core competency, and really trying to learn myself. So I don't know if I can add anything more than what's already been added, which is incredible. And I'm taking notes, but Trent really drove home a point that I wanted to drive home, that you really need to start with yourself. And I think that is absolutely critical, because data can tell a story, to Chris's point, in a very large organization or in a very small organization, whether or not you have a people analytics department. We don't. We have a person that's working on that, but it definitely can tell a story. And I think the one thing that I'd add that I don't think really came up is it really should be meaningful data. I think sometimes we can throw in data for data's sake and nobody looks at it. It's not really connected to the business outcomes. I think that you should really do a deep dive on what's important to your people strategy and to your business strategy.
Wonderful, Tracy. Thank you so much. And once again, thank you and welcome everybody to this conversation. Over the past 20 months, which will become 24 months soon, 2 years of COVID, HR somewhat became a more not only visible but relevant in the eyes of the business leaders. I mean, we were always relevant, but in the eyes of the business leaders, we became more relevant of a function. And we did so because a lot of the problems that we're seeing around the workplace today are people problems. Now, from the data perspective, there are many organizations that have been trying to set up their business functions, their data analytics functions, in order to be better at leveraging on data and providing the right insights to their business leaders to make the best possible decisions. Now, let me transform this into this following question. For those HR leaders that want to continue to lead the way, to be relevant as they have been over the past 20 months, maybe in your view, what are the 1, 2, maybe up to 3 things that you think that are sort of the low-hanging fruits that once they connect those low-hanging fruits with data analytics, they can present a strong case with a story to their business leaders to do better in their organizations. And I'm asking this question because, throughout the entire event today, we have talked about data analytics in so many different spaces, but we all know, of course, that the capacity for any function, and especially in HR, which generally is understaffed, under-resourced, the capacity to operate is generally minimal. So I want them to be focused on the things that will deliver quick wins in the fastest way possible, in the most effective way possible. So maybe 2 or 3 low-hanging fruits that once connected to data can create a powerful story of change for their organizations and make them, continue to be leaders in these times of transformation. Anybody wants to jump in? Trent, go ahead, please.
Well, since acquisition and retention are in my title, those are those are probably the 2 that I'm going to lead with. On the acquisition side, I know, Enrique, you and I've we've talked about my passion for, I call them quick quits. The bane of my existence on the acquisition side is we hire, and then if you go back and you look at how many people left in 1 year, you get acid reflux, and then you probably need to go in the hospital if you really zero in on what happens in the first 90 days. So you've got this rat wheel of people coming in and going out of the organization and the cost. So I think the first measure that I would look at is, of course, the turnover. I'm going to come back to that one from a retention, but on the acquisition side, are you recruiting the right people? I think, for our organization, I brought our team together and showed them the data. And I said, we are contributing to the turnover problem. We've got to stop it. We're kind of the, we're the ones that determine who's going to sit at our table and not. And we need to be a little bit more specific about it. And which means that we're going to have to get with our client and leverage data to find out who are the successful and the best, fits for the organization from a success persona is what we call it, and then start recruiting against that. But in order to come up with that success persona, it's not Mr. and Miss Manager, who do you think is good? It's let's look at some of the metrics and leverage that data to start building out what that persona is. So that's kind of the tip of the spear, as I call it. I think a good easy one, if you don't have an analytics group or you're not good at analytics, looking at your turnover, not just the number, but looking at your exit surveys and put those 2 together. I recently did an exercise for our CEO, I think maybe May or June. And we all had our suspicions as to why people were leaving. But whenever I looked at the survey data, what I thought was number 1 was number 4. And what I thought was number 2 was number 3. And it was the qualitative was higher than the quantitative data points, which was fascinating to me. So I think those are just 2 really easy, low-hanging fruits that just about anybody can do. I mean, you don't have to have a degree in economics or a minor in statistics and finance to be able to kind of dig into that. And it's pretty low-hanging fruit, and it's relevant. That's a great way to start showing the business this is some stuff that we need to start paying attention to.
Awesome, Trent. Thank you so much for sharing those insights. Anybody wants to go next?
I'll go ahead.
Don't go ahead, and then we go with Chris and Tracy.
So on the Trent, you mentioned qualitative data. I'm going to stick with that theme, particularly because we've just had about 18 months where I would say qualitative data is some of the most important information that we should be paying attention to right now. So I would be shocked at any company that did not create a survey during COVID to find out how their employees were feeling, how they were doing what they needed from leadership. And so I think that in terms of low-hanging fruit, but even just having some type of survey once a year, you don't even have to call it an engagement survey, but at 2 questions that we feel like are just super easy questions, but give us a wealth of information is, what do you like most working at the company? And what do you like least? Okay. You can get a whole host of information that can drive many, many, many different activities across the organization by just asking those 2 very simple questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dawn. Tracy, I think oh, Chris, I'm sorry, you were going next, and then Tracy. Oops, sorry.
No worries. I'm going to piggyback a little bit on what they both said, because Tracy brought up a point earlier about data tells can tell a story, and I firmly agree with that. And I think sometimes we just don't look at it in depth, because it actually can tell multiple stories. And the thing that's really key, and I loved about just bringing up the quantitative or the qualitative side too, is that the data doesn't tell you why, right? And I think sometimes we look at things, and not with the lens of getting the most bang for the buck, and not always looking with the answers in mind, right? But what question am I going to ask next if, once I get this question answered? What is the next logical thing? So I do think it's really whether it's low hanging fruit, or whether you're finally going to get at something that nobody else is getting at. Because sometimes, what we found was some of the data, even around attrition, that it was happening at all, at almost every generation. And it was on tenure, as less, it was more on tenure than maybe on, the fact that it was, millennials or things like that. So sometimes we start with the answers in mind. I'm going to go on what are quick hits, and I'm going to use my air quotes here, but because none of this is quick, right? Because it's really to fix that is not. But things like pay equity and diversity data can give you it's a quick run of data, right? But you can see you've got an issue, right? And then you can start kind of, bearing down a little bit on that. It's not a quick fix, but it's something, if you address head on, openly and transparently, and authentically, that you're doing something, there's a problem, you're addressing it, you start to build trust. And this is really what things are going to start to come down to. Same thing with diversity data. You can start to really call these things out. And at least it makes people feel like, okay, people are hearing this. What are we going to do now? So it's quick data to get. It's not quick fixes, but
yeah. Thank you, Chris. Thank you for sharing. Those insights. I appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah. Tracy, then we go with Michal, and then Trent.
Once again, I'm taking notes and loving what's been said. And I think, and I'm still a student every day, especially in this area. But I think what Chris said about the diversity data and the pay equity, definitely not a quick fix, but one of the most impactful, two of the most impactful things you can do for your organization. There's so many great tools that can sit over what's already there and mine that data. And what Dawn said about the most and the least, we actually just started doing that a couple of months ago. We have a people experience manager who came from our accounting department, and she is literally asking those two questions to every single person in our organization, and getting such good data, and not only good data, but actionable data. And I think that's really important. So you can get all the data you want, but then what are you going to do with it? Yeah. So we're really taking that, acting on it, and that goes, like Chris said, builds trust. That can help align your people strategy and your business strategy when you actually do something with what you're getting.
Love it, Tracy. Thank you. And by the way, we had today we had a panel on engaging business leaders, and the main question behind it was, all right, now you have the data, all right, well, somebody will have to make decisions informed by that data. It's not enough just to having the data, or even having beautiful dashboards and visualizations, or let alone analysis on the data, if you're not doing anything with it. So wonderful that you are bringing that up. Michal?
Thank you, Enrique. So I may be bringing like an not so favorable opinion, but I just want to highlight a different angle of quick win with data that relates to also what Tracy said before about meaningful data. So there are like maybe quick wins or quick pieces of data, but also I think to talk to the trust that Chris is talking about, it's important to make sure that we are not just taking quick data because it's available to try and create a quick win. So I get a lot of companies turn to me and say, okay, I have this email data, I have calendar data, I want to run a network analysis, right? Now, that may be the data that you have, and that may be the easy access. And you say, okay, and people tell me, okay, so once I have this, then I can show it to I can show managers what it is. I can build my quick win. I can build on that. But often using the wrong data for what you want to achieve, if you're not connecting it to the business problem, and you know that this is the meaningful data for this problem, then you won't get that quick win that you want, even if you get quick data. So I just want to highlight that sometimes it's hard to get quick wins with data, because you need to think about the data strategy and the data cleaning and the reliability of your data. And I think that maybe if you are using quick data, try to think of crossing data. So not using just one source or one system to get data, but taking from different pieces from different areas. And like Don said before, coming with hypotheses on how these pieces of data may interconnect to provide more meaningful insights. So to make sure you're not just using quick data, you're really gaining credibility, and you producing value at the end of this to the business.
Absolutely. By the way, Don's team at Microsoft has done an incredible work of connecting data from everywhere to create stories on employee experience, and many more, of course, elements. But connecting, like what you're saying, Michal, connecting all data from everywhere, and making decisions and informing decisions and creating stories out of that. So wonderful that you mentioned that. I will let Trent come in, but Don, I don't know if you will want to add anything about that after Trent.
I will wait till Trent goes. You go, Trent.
And I'm so glad that I was the gentleman, Mikhail, and let you go first, because it just like dovetails in exactly what I wanted to talk about. Is that you need to have this intellectual curiosity, is what I call it. But for people like me, I kind of have to keep it in check, because there will be one data point and I go, what does that mean? Why is it this way? And then I start chasing it, and it's just like, kind of pulling a piece of yarn. But I think that, and I think, Chris, you kind of hit on it too, is not just going, okay, well, here's the data, here's, what it's saying. It's kind of pulling back the onion layers and taking that extra step, which I think is incredibly important. If you do, let's just do an employee survey as an example, because we've talked about that a little bit. You get the survey data and you kind of do a summary. I think it's, before you go and present it to leaders, I think it's great to go and pull in maybe a focus group of employees and show them, hey, this is what the organization is saying. Can I get your insight? And let them kind of add to the story and add some different chapters. And for me, maybe I'm just sadistic, but I always like to go into the leaders, and I don't let them know that I have any of the data. I'm like, what do you think's going on? And ask them those open-ended questions, and then throw the data up there. And it's like it's kind of like a mental shock for them, and I call it shocking their paradigm, because they come in thinking that they already have the answer. And whenever you put that data, and especially, was being spoken of earlier, it's not just take your organization data. I bring in industry data. I pull in Bureau of Labor Statistics and say, here's where we are, here's where our competitors are, and here's what's going on in the industry. It's kind of like this trifecta. Here's a 360 view. How are we going to deal with this? And oh, by the way, before you start discounting what's up here because you don't agree with it, or maybe it points a finger at you, I've validated this with real life humans, employees, and they added to the story. And let me pull back another layer. And I think that's just a really good, easy approach to make sure that you're laying that groundwork of validating the data, but also sustaining its need and giving it some credibility. And it says something too. I think it for you to take that data from employees, that survey data, and then show it to the leaders, and then there to be action on it. Oh my God. After that, you'll see your participation rate in those type of surveys just skyrocket, because they start to see, okay, wow, they're listening. So I think that's kind of, to me, that's the 1, 2, 3 step that I always try to take. You don't have to be sadistic and lure them in, like I do. I just do it because it's funny. But if you don't want to do that, you can definitely curtail that part.
Awesome, Trent. Thank you so much. And we're going to dig a little deeper into something that you mentioned, but I want to let Don come in first and then we get there. Don, please go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, Mikhail, that you think that you were saying something that people wouldn't agree with. I mean, absolutely, the fact that there is no low-hanging fruit that doesn't connect to the business strategy or the problems that you're trying to solve. Okay, you can spend a whole lot of time doing something simple, and if it doesn't connect to your strategy or any type of issues, it's going to go nowhere. But the one thing that I will say is that there are a whole lot of companies out there that it is overwhelming for them to think about combining different data sources together. Okay. And so people do need to start small and realize that even one data set can provide them with rich information if they're doing it the right way. Talk about combining data sets, of course. I mean, Enrique mentioned that we do this a lot. We do this a lot with calendar and email metadata. Looking at that type of data in and of itself is actually not usually that actionable. But as soon as you start connecting that with survey responses to understand people's perception of work-life balance compared to the collaboration overload that they're experiencing, and looking at different types of jobs and how that can be different depending on the role that you have, or during COVID, when everyone was home all the time and realizing that people had their kids at home and they were trying to help their kids during school, and that flexibility of working at night could actually be very important to certain people. And they were actually even more engaged when they were allowed to work when they needed to work. Okay. Instead of making that flat assumption that people that work after hours are not engaged. Okay, you can't necessarily say that, but that, to me, that's a little bit more sophisticated. And that when I talk to folks that are just starting off to say something like that, it's definitely overwhelming, and it pushes them back to say, maybe I can't do this. And so that's why I think as leaders in this field, in order for us to be the most inclusive to everyone, we have to think about ways that we can do things and help folks start small.
Wonderful, Don. Thank you so much, Trent. We're gonna get there. Will you add anything to this?
No. We can go on.
Oh, I wanted to ask you all a question. And Trent, you started touching a little bit on this area. I feel that the next question that I'm going to ask you puts me in a place of swimming a little bit against the current in HR, because traditionally, both in the portfolio of HR work and in the way HR people are trained, generally they are sort of pushed to focus only internally in the company, and little attention do we pay to what's going on outside of the company, to all those variables that are impacting the work that our organizations are doing. So this idea that I want to bring forward is connecting data from the company with data from outside of the company to make decisions that help business strategy, that informs business strategy and helps the business achieve their goals. And I want to give you one example that I always bring up. Well, not always. Over the pandemic, I've been bringing it up. I read, this was probably mid last year, that about there was a 20-30% decrease of single apartment, single bedroom or one bedroom apartment rentals in San Francisco. And the reason for that was because people were leaving San Francisco because they didn't need to be there anymore. They were making their, whatever amount of salary they were making, but they were moving to, Arizona, where I live, or Nevada, or whatever it is. Now, for a lot of recruiters, this was, they didn't analyze these migration patterns, and that didn't inform their recruitment strategy to be able to cater to their business needs, but also, bound by the conditions and the circumstances that we were going through last year. And I'm using that as an example to put context into this question. How do we, if at all, how do we connect external data? Trent, you mentioned a BLM. How do we connect external data with internal data to inform in a much comprehensive way business strategy to achieve business outcomes? And again, I don't know. I'm pretty sure that most HR people are not even thinking about this because it's not only is it complex, but they already have their hands pretty full with stuff that is happening inside their organizations. But I'm hoping that we plant the seed for them to start either thinking about it or acting on it.
I'll jump in, Enrique, if you
Tracy, go ahead, please.
don't mind. So as that HR person who has lived this, and this is one thing when I talk to people who are on their journey or want to do things a little differently than we were trained. For example, I talk about looking at external data a lot and reading external publications and getting in your industry. Like I said, I'm at a conference. It's not an HR conference, it's an executive conference, but I'm learning a ton. And one of the speakers here is an economist. And one of the things that I read all of the time is I read economic reports. And because if I read these economic reports and I see that housing starts are down, that tells me that it's going to impact our people strategy because we are very tied to housing stops and starts. So right now, our company is doing extremely well because the economy has been going well. People are building. But that's going to impact who we can hire, increasing my team and all of that. So I think you have to know what you need to know by, and I always talk about this, networking, understand what's going on outside of your own little world and get to know people outside of HR, get to know people in finance, get to know people in marketing, get to know people in economics, and really kind of hit them up to understand that data. And it's something that I've grown to really like, and we're bringing our economist in. And this was my suggestion. I think my CEO was like, wait, what? You suggested this? I'm like, yes, this is because we all need to know this in order to know. And there's lots of other things, but that's just one practical example.
I love that, Tracy. And I want to tell everybody who is listening here or who will be watching this panel later on, I beg you, for all that is beautiful in the world, please don't just learn about HR. If you are in HR, learn about a bunch of other things because you have no idea. Maybe you do, but you have no idea in the short term, long term, how all of that data from other areas, the economy, the data that BLM puts out, and who knows what else, that all of that information will be very, very valuable to inform your people strategy. So please do that. Michal, I know you wanted to go next.
Thank you, Enrique. I want to piggyback on and take it so reading here and reading there and bringing other people than HR. I want to take it into diversity and curiosity overall. I think that diversity is a real key for being exposed to external factors that we might not think about. Like one example that I have is almost 10 years ago when I worked in the US in a big multinational company, and the headquarters are in the US, right? And I needed to build a program for training for the European employees. I realized that first I need to understand the education system in each of the countries as they relate to English. And how much can I trust English to be that common language, and how much can I think of differences in the way that we when we build those leadership programs, how much this local education system can play a role in building this corporate learning program, bringing different cultures together. So I may not have thought about it if I maybe was in that team and I was an American, maybe bringing and coming from a different, being not having English as my native language, going through processes in the US, learning in English and getting my my degree, and got me to think maybe differently, to search for that data and to know that it's relevant. So I think that the diversity of our teams, of the people thinking about the data, is highly critical in bringing this external data in.
Wonderful, Michal, and great example, by the way. So thank you so much for that. Chris, I'm gonna go next with you.
Thank you. I love that we're talking about this because it is so incredibly important. And I have, enormous stories from when I was in HR of big decisions that I could help make using some of this external data, right? And I think I want to just give an example that maybe people might not think about, but I remember when offshoring and people were really starting to think about offshoring, and I worked for a software company, and they were going to just take all their product lines, right? And they were going to go and they bought a company in India, and they were like, we'll just put all of these over here. And they didn't think about like where it was, location, what was the talent pool like? This was back in, maybe 2005. And it was like, there was data out there, but where and what? And I was so worried about the decisions they were making because of where we had bought. And I started looking to some of my vendors, right? To some of my vendors to say, how many jobs are being posted here? How many people are getting this? You start, and it goes back to some of the threads that we've said, right? Curiosity. Like what we're doing is bigger than employees. Like, if talent is involved, you've got to think about it. And that's where that curiosity comes in. But I can imagine a lot of people being super overwhelmed by this. Oh my God, I'm trying to keep the lights on, and now I got to go read, BLS data, and I've got to talk to economists, and I've got to do all this stuff. And it is a little overwhelming, but it's important. But how can you work smart, not hard, right? And look to your vendors. I know people are sitting with a lot of vendors in their tech stack. They've got vendor partners. They've got whatever, right? Look to your vendors to see if they have data, where they're getting data. How can they be doing it? How can they help you? Ask questions of them too, because you might be amazed that they're looking at that data too, right? And maybe they can call it for you. Find people that are already talking about these things like you've heard already, and maybe they're posting things like, there's a way to maybe at least dip your toe in the water and see if it's helping you form, and add to these conversations. But don't limit the conversations that you're in from a business standpoint, because talent almost always impacts it. And how we bring in information and manage information through the organization is what's going to determine those actions. So, look to your vendors too, because they may be doing some of this for you already. Whether it's job boards, whether it's, your ATS companies, whether it's your HR payroll vendor, whatever it is, you never know. Check that out, right? If you're using RPOs in some of your leverage those, all of these things, ask a lot of questions, because it might not just be that you have to go out and do all of this on your own.
Thank you so much, Chris, for that. By the way, I have been saying BLM instead of BLS. I was thinking about the Bureau of Land Management. I think I'm thinking about forests and, the pictures in my background of forests and all that, public lands. So Bureau of Labor Statistics, by the way, just in case I got you all a little confused in there.
You had me confused. I went to Google. I was like, all right, is there a new publication
No, I know.
I should be reading?
Also very important, though.
Very important.
You gotta know data about that. But Chris said BLS, and I'm like, why did she say BLS? I mean, what's going on here? And I Googled it too, so just in case. So it's BLS, what we're talking about. Now, if you want to include data from land management, you can do that too, but it's going to be even more complex to connect that with people strategy. Trent, go ahead, please.
So I'm going to also call out an elephant in the room. So all of us are data people, right? I think we represent probably still maybe 20, maybe 25% of the general HR industry. All right. I know a lot of HR people, whenever I ask them, okay, what made you get into HR? What made you major into HR? They said, I like business, but I didn't like math. So they went into either marketing or HR. And I think the tide is turning, and I think all that COVID did was just exacerbate this need that true HR people need to be that business consultant. So if you're out there and you're like, I got into HR so I wouldn't have to do math, believe me, it's okay. We're talking about bringing in all this information in the whole work smarter, not harder. this is kind of a 1-2 punch for you. If you find an article out there, like I think Enrique referenced the number of people moving out of San Francisco, and you think that it may have an impact, that's where you engage your business partner, your line of business executive, and say, hey, I found this article. I think that it has some implications to our industry. Do you have some time to talk, or what are your insights? And it creates that relationship, but it also gives you the valuable insight that you need. There was a recent announcement today from GE. I think they're splitting into a couple of different organizations, and so I snatched it and sent it over to one
Wow.
of our executives and said, "Hey, is this going to be an opportunity for us from a talent acquisition standpoint? Because one of their spaces is renewable, and we're big into renewable." And it opened up a conversation and said, yes, I want to explore that. It took me 5 seconds to copy and paste a LinkedIn thing and send it over to the manager. But, you can do this and establish some credibility, but also leverage your business partners. And to me, that's the fun part. I have,
Yeah.
especially, I've gone from banking and healthcare, which was, 17 years of my experience in talent acquisition and HR, into testing, inspection, and certification. And the best way that I've learned is by asking those questions, that again, that intellectual curiosity, and pulling that data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Now you got me thinking, I'm going to screw that up on the next call that I'm on. Pulling it from BLS and pulling it from all these other things and say, okay, I think these are some valuable data points, but remember, I'm new to the industry. Help me understand. So it's, I just wanted to kind of give a little bit of love to those people out there whose eyes are glazed over going, okay, I don't even like to spell analytics, and now they're saying go and pull all this stuff in.
Yeah.
There's an easy way to do it.
Fantastic, Trent. Thank you so much. We are getting very close to the end of the panel, and I want to make sure that we cover this last question. And maybe Michal, Don, you want to kick it off first. Very briefly, Don, you talked a little bit about this at the beginning, which is building the capabilities in HR to be a data-informed business leader. And now we've been covering a lot of this throughout the panels today, but I want to ask you sort of the same question. What capabilities are we talking about? What do we need both as an HR department, HR function, meaning, everybody who works in HR, but also the HR individuals, those professionals that are, performing the work of HR. What are the capabilities that we need in order to be data-informed business leaders? Don?
Yeah, so at least at Microsoft, we feel like it's super important for our HR professionals to be able to generate data insights and then leverage data insights. Okay, so we're not asking for our HR professionals to all be analysts, but we provide a whole bunch of reporting and analytics at scale to our HR organization. We want them to be able to look at them, be able to understand them, and then generate insights, because data plus context is truly the insights. And while my team can generate lots and lots of data and connect different data sets together, without context, it's very hard to take action. And that's where we really rely on our HR professionals and the partners that we have with them. The partnership is for them to provide the context that we might not necessarily know. And so they have to be literate in the reporting and analytics that we provide. And then being able to leverage data insights for business cases or for influencing their business partners into making decisions. And so we actually have 2 training classes that we teach our HR professionals specifically on those types of capabilities. And that's outside from the general tool training. Okay, how do you use the tools that we're providing you? How do you read the reports? But these 2 other concepts of kind of generating data insights and then leveraging data insights, super important.
Wonderful, Don. Thank you so much for sharing that. Michal, do you want to go next?
Sure. So maybe like a parallel set of capabilities to help with the data is like a dialogic capabilities of creating that insight, not necessarily like how do you create it with the business leaders while understanding that this data sometimes bring out fears and rejections So like sometimes business leaders don't like to see the data that you bring. Sometimes there are psychological like stopping, or like this data is not reliable from the business manager because it's just not a nice mirror sometimes. And there are like capabilities of connecting that cold data with the warm people, heart and emotions, and what the data generates in people, that I think that is a really important capability for HR, to be able to create that dialogue, to bring that insights with the leaders, with the people themselves, and to overcome these fears that sometimes come, especially if our data is touching on painful points, bringing up mirrors that we don't want to see. So especially sometimes when the data is the most meaningful, it's where we get the most rejection, because it just sits on a lot of fears and identity and a lot of other things. So I think the capability of connecting and bringing the data to the people in a digestible way and in a dialogue.
Wonderful, Michal. Thank you so much. Capabilities, Trent, Tracy, Chris, in one sentence, since we're getting very close to wrapping up this panel, in one sentence, what capability or capabilities do you think we would want HR to build a skill itself in order to be that data informed leader? Chris, one sentence for that.
Yeah, I mean, we've kind of talked about data fluency and storytelling versus not being a data scientist, but I also think learning how to shift from being the expert in the room with all the answers to really being the one that facilitates finding the answers. We have to realize we don't live in a world of certainties. We live in a world of probabilities. So he or she who asks the best questions wins. He or she who gets the right people at the table to facilitate getting to answers, not having the answers, I think is really key. And then you start, putting that together with curiosity and driving to that with business outcomes in mind. Those capabilities are key.
Love that. Thank you, Chris. Tracy, one sentence, capabilities for to be a data informed leader from an HR standpoint.
I think take the things that we're good at traditionally in HR: empathy, relationships, curiosity. Take those and apply those to something that gets you really far out of your comfort zone, and take everything, all of your skill sets, and use that to develop those capabilities, which I can't say any better than has been said already.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Tracy. Trent, one sentence.
I am going to go comic book on everyone. Be the Riddler and not the Joker. The Joker created mayhem because he went off of emotion. The Riddler always asks questions and let everybody else create their own chaos. So if you want to be a good data person, ask the right questions.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much, Michal, Trent, Tracy, Dawn, Chris, for being here, sharing all of your insights to our community watching today. Thank you so much for spending 8 hours with us during this event. All of the videos will be available for you by next week. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Stay safe and stay healthy. And we will be in touch and around. Thank you so much. Stay safe and stay well.